Dr. Nightechoes.
My wife and I were camping at Big Bend in Texas. It was the middle of the night, and the desert was completely still. I was deep in sleep until I felt her hand grip my shoulder. She was shaking me hard, but she wasn't making a single sound. I opened my eyes and saw her face in the pale moonlight filtering through the tent. Her eyes were wide, and she looked absolutely terrified. I started to ask what was wrong, but she clamped her hand over my mouth instantly. She didn't say a word. She just pointed toward the mesh screen at the tent entrance. I slowly turned my head. My heart stopped. A cougar was lying on the dirt, exactly 6 feet away from our faces. It wasn't moving. It was just resting there, staring directly through the thin screen at us. I could see the reflection of the moon in its yellow eyes. Its breathing was steady, and its tail made a soft, thudding sound as it hit the dry ground. We both stayed perfectly still. I didn't even dare to blink. I felt like a piece of meat being watched by a hunter. We stared at each other for what felt like hours. The cat didn't growl or hiss. It just watched us with a cold, heavy curiosity. Finally, it stood up. It was much larger than I expected. It stretched its front paws out, let out a low yawn, and then turned around. It walked away into the darkness without making a single sound on the gravel. We sat there in the dark for the rest of the night, listening to every rustle of the wind. I kept thinking about how easily that screen would have ripped. We didn't close our eyes until the sun came up. We were car camping deep in the Colorado backcountry, miles down a service road south of Gypsum. There were 8 of us and 3 cars. It was the kind of place where you can hear a vehicle approaching from miles away, but the woods had been dead silent all evening. We finished dinner just as the sun started to dip below the horizon. The shadows were stretching out, turning the pine trees into jagged teeth against the sky. We walked back to the cars to grab some gear before heading to our tents for the night. As we reached the parking area, I heard a faint, rhythmic hissing. It sounded like a snake hidden in the dry grass. We checked the first car. The front right tire was completely flat. Then we checked the second car. Same thing. The third car was identical. Someone had used a blade to slice a clean, deep, horizontal line into the exact same spot on every single sidewall. The realization hit us like ice water. Our group was large, but the panic was instant. We were only 30 yards from our campfire, and someone had been close enough to touch our vehicles without making a sound. They had been watching us eat. They had been waiting for the right moment to trap us there. We didn't wait for a second longer. One of my friends pulled his handgun and stood guard, scanning the dark tree line with a tactical light while the rest of us worked. We threw on the spare donuts in record time. Our hands were shaking so hard we could barely tighten the lug nuts. Every snap of a twig in the woods sounded like a footstep. We drove out of there without looking back. Even now, I can't shake the feeling of those eyes on my back. Someone wanted us to stay in those woods, and I don't think they wanted to talk. I drove to a mountain trailhead for a late-night hike. The parking lot was empty. Before I even turned off the engine, I felt something was wrong. A heavy feeling settled in my chest. It felt like someone was watching me, I told myself it was just fear of the dark and stepped out of the car. I started walking on the narrow trail. My headlamp lit a small path through the trees. About 10 minutes later, I heard a loud branch snap behind me. I turned around quickly, but nothing was there. The forest was completely still. I kept walking, but it happened again, then again. Every time I stopped to listen, everything went silent. No wind, no sound. It felt like something was following me and stopping whenever I stopped. That's when I decided to go back. The feeling was too wrong. As I walked back down the trail, my light caught something off to the side. A person was standing behind a thin tree. They were completely still. They were not wearing hiking clothes, just normal dark clothes. I said hello, but my voice shook. They didn't respond. They didn't move at all. They just stared at me, like I wasn't even there. I started walking faster. My heart was pounding hard. I didn't look back until I reached my car. I jumped inside and locked the doors right away. As I reversed, my headlights moved across the edge of the road. That's when I saw them again. They were standing at the edge of the parking lot, right where the trees meet the road. They were just watching my car. They didn't move. They didn't try to stop me. They just stood there, frozen. I drove away as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I reached the city lights. I still don't understand how they got down there so fast, without making any sound. My girlfriend and I were walking our dogs around our old neighborhood late one night. I was a few yards ahead of her, turning a corner with our two younger dogs. They were pulling hard on their leashes. She was behind me with our oldest dog. I didn't see the man approach her. She told me everything later when she caught up. She noticed a man standing in the shadows near a neighbor's driveway. He looked like he was watching the dark windows of the house. When he realized she saw him, he stepped into the light. He greeted her casually. She stayed polite and asked how he was doing. She was trying to keep things normal. Before he could finish speaking, our old dog changed. He stopped walking. He braced his legs and let out a deep, low growl. It vibrated through his whole body. He had never done that before. My girlfriend felt embarrassed and apologized right away. She lied and said the dog was trained as a guard dog. She tried to explain the sudden behavior. The man didn't look upset. He didn't look scared either. He just stared at her with a blank, cold expression. Then he nodded slowly. "Well," he said in a flat voice, "he's doing a very good job tonight." He stayed there, not moving, until she walked away quickly to find me. We never saw that man again, but we stopped walking that route after dark. I still think about that night. That dog sensed something we couldn't. He wasn't just growling at a stranger. He was warning us. I often hike in the woods near my town. I usually stay late enough to see the sunrise. One night, I went deeper than usual and found something that shouldn't have been there. It looked like a small shanty town in a clearing. There were around a dozen small shelters. I walked into the middle of the camp. I saw a fire pit made from an old truck tire. The rubber was still burning, and a bright orange fire was crackling inside it. It was well past midnight, but the place was completely silent. I didn't hear any voices. I didn't hear anyone sleeping. I couldn't even hear the wind in the trees. I walked closer to one of the shelters and looked inside. There were personal items everywhere. I saw muddy shoes, a half-eaten bowl of food, and a child's backpack. It looked like people had just stepped away for a moment, but something felt wrong. The silence felt heavy. It felt like something was watching me from the dark gaps in the metal. I stood near the fire. That's when I noticed something strange. There were no footprints leading out of the clearing. The fire looked fresh. I slowly started backing away, trying not to make any noise. I felt like if I turned around, someone would speak behind me. I walked 3 miles back to the trail without stopping. I never told anyone about this place, but I still think about it sometimes. I wonder who kept that fire burning. I can still smell the rubber when I close my eyes. I know they are still out there. I used to spend my summers bouldering in a forest about 90 minutes from my house. My friends and I would camp out there to save money. On our 3rd trip, my friend's gear went missing. She left her boots and rucksack right outside her tent. In the morning, they were just gone. Her clothes and chalk powder had vanished too. We were creeped out, but we didn't want to admit someone was stealing from us. We told ourselves a large animal must have taken interest in the smell. It was a dumb excuse, but it let us keep camping. We went back to that same spot exactly 1 year later. We were sitting by the fire after a long day of climbing. It was the middle of the night and the woods were silent. I walked a little way into the trees to go to the bathroom. I stepped away from the firelight and looked at the ground. There was a man lying flat on his stomach in the dirt. He was wearing a full ghillie suit. He was covered in dead leaves and netting. He was only a few feet away from me, staring directly at our camp. He was just watching my friends laugh. I stood there frozen. My heart was pounding in my ears. The man saw me and didn't say a word. He just scrambled up and ran into the deep brush. He was incredibly fast. I realized he had been there the whole time, hidden in plain sight. I think about the gear that went missing the year before. I wonder if he still has those boots. We never went back to those woods. Now I can't look at a pile of leaves without shivering. I always feel like the ground is breathing. I was a teenager when I heard about an abandoned mansion hidden near the Meadowdale Beach Trail. My friend said the neighbors were aggressive and called the police on anyone who got close. To avoid them, I decided to cut through the deep woods using a GPS on my phone. I left the marked trail and started stumbling through thick brush, trying to find a shortcut. After 30 minutes of hiking through tangled branches, I stumbled onto a paved road. It was perfectly maintained, but it was in the middle of nowhere. There were no signs and no power lines, just black asphalt slicing through the trees. I thought I heard the low hum of an engine, so I panicked and scrambled up a steep embankment to hide. I reached the top of the hill and peered through the tall grass. Just below me was a clearing filled with exactly 12 tents. They weren't colorful camping tents. They were heavy military-style canvas, all gray and weathered. There were no campfires and no trash. It was almost 2 p.m., but I didn't see a single person moving. The silence was heavy and suffocating. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the clearing. I realized I was standing right above a hidden community that didn't want to be found. My stomach dropped. I didn't wait to see who lived there. I slid back down the hill and sprinted into the trees, my lungs burning as I pushed through the thorns. I eventually found the mansion on a different trip, but I never went back to that road. I still don't know who owns that land, or what those 12 families were doing so far from the world. I just know that someone was probably watching me from a tent flap the entire time. I have a large farm in Gippsland, Australia. Every night I walk the perimeter fences with my dogs to unwind. One winter I spent the day burning a massive pile of dead trees in the back paddock. By 9 p.m. the fire was still a glowing heap of orange embers. I went to the kennels to grab the dogs for our nightly walk, but they wouldn't move. They just stared at me from the back of their boxes. I figured they were exhausted from herding all day, so I headed out into the dark, alone. The air grew unnaturally cold as I approached the burn site. A heavy, sickening chill settled in my chest. I walked toward the heat of the fire, trying to stay calm. When I was about 5 meters from the flames, I caught movement to my left. A dark shape was standing about 50 feet behind me. I assumed one of the dogs had changed its mind and followed me out. I whistled and called its name, but the figure didn't budge. It just stood there, tall and perfectly still, just outside the reach of the firelight. Panic set in. I grabbed a heavy, burning branch from the pile to use as a club. I thought it was a wild dog, and I was terrified of being mauled in the dark. I took 2 aggressive steps toward the shape to scare it off. The thing took off like a bullet. It didn't run like any animal I've ever seen. It cleared the high boundary fence in a single effortless leap and vanished into the thick scrub. The only sound was the heavy thud of it hitting the brush on the other side. I ran back to the house and found my dogs exactly where I had left them. The next morning, I drove the ute back to the paddock. My dogs refused to get out of the tray. Even the cows stayed on the far side of the property, staring at that empty patch of ground. I don't walk the fences at night anymore. When I have to go out after dark, I never go without a loaded rifle in my hands. I know that thing is still out there, waiting for the fire to go out.